You know, when we think about early Christianity, meeting the Germanic tribes, the picture that usually comes to mind is, well, it's pretty simple, right? A story of conquest. But what if that's not what happened at all? Today on The Explainer, we're going to dig into how this encounter wasn't some one-way street. It was actually a massive transformation for both sides.
All right, so let's just jump right in with a pretty provocative idea, one that kind of flips the script on what most of us probably learned in history class. The Germanic peoples of early medieval Europe, they didn't just become Christian. No. In a very, very real way, Christianity actually became Germanic.
So to really get what happened, we've got to start with the version of the story that's probably familiar to all of us. You know, the one we all got in school.
Right. So this is the story we all know, yeah? You've got these quote-unquote barbarian tribes. Then these really determined Christian missionaries show up. And through a combination of, preaching and, well, a lot of military force, I mean, just think about Charlemagne and the Saxons, boom, everybody gets converted. It's all framed as this really simple process, right? A sophisticated religion comes in and just replaces these primitive beliefs. But as we're about to see, the real story is just never that neat and tidy.
Okay, so the very first step in peeling back the layers of this thing, it's the question, the most basic word we use for all of this. And that word is conversion.
And this gets us to a really crucial point. The word conversion itself, it just carries so much baggage. It makes you think of a total clean break from the past, right? Like you're just completely replacing one set of beliefs with a totally new one. But, and this is the key, that's not really what was going on here at all. See, the original Christian idea of conversion, and it's captured in this Greek word metanoia, was something deeply, deeply personal. It was an internal thing. It meant like a conversion from sin. We're talking about a profound soul-level transformation for a single person, a conscious choice to turn away from one way of life and embrace a completely different one.
And this right here is the critical distinction that scholars point to. On the one hand, you have that super personal reorientation of the soul, which is how the theologian Arthur Nock put it. But then, on the other hand, you've got what the historian Ramsay MacMullen saw happening at a huge societal level. This wasn't some profound inner change for everybody. It was more like an adhesion, you know? People started following new rituals, but often it was for political or social gain. It was a much less radical break with the past.
So, all of this brings us to a much, much better way to understand this history. A model that doesn't see it as a one-way conquest, but as a two-way street. A process that we can call Germanization. And what's so fascinating here is that this shift, it wasn't an accident. And it wasn't even some kind of subtle resistance from the Germanic peoples. No, it was a deliberate strategy. The Christian missionaries themselves figured out that to have any real success, they had to adapt their religion to the local culture. They had to actually incorporate Germanic values and attitudes directly into the faith.
Okay, I love this analogy. It just makes so much sense. Think of it like this. Early Christianity is like clear water, and the Germanic culture, that's a colored glass. Now, when you pour that clear water into the colored glass, what happens? It doesn't just fill the glass, it actually takes on its shape and its color. The substance is still water, sure, but how it looks, its entire appearance, is fundamentally changed by the container that's holding it.
All right, so let's get into some real, concrete examples of how this whole Germanization thing actually worked. You know, how it played out on the ground. And believe me, the changes were sweeping. This new hybrid faith, it soaked up the Germanic warrior ethos. It completely transformed how people worshipped. It shifted core social values, and it even started to portray Christ himself not as this humble savior, but as a triumphant, victorious warlord. I mean, that's a huge shift.
Okay, the most powerful example of this cultural mashup, it has to be the Germanic warrior code. For the pagan Germanic cultures, war wasn't just war. It was seen as a religious act. This warrior ethos wasn't some small part of their society. The sources we have literally describe it as ineradicable. It was absolutely central to who they were.
So what did the church do? Did they try to stamp it out? Nope, they absorbed it. Missionaries and theologians actually started using the language and the ideas of pagan warfare in their own teachings. And this all reached a kind of peak with guys like Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. He wrote what was, for all intents and purposes, a recruitment pamphlet for the Knights Templar. And in it, he completely reframed the killing of non-Christians as a holy act.
And the result of all this? Well, you get a brand new kind of holy warrior, one that blended Christian devotion with Germanic martial values.
This fusion is what gave us organizations like the Knights Templar, an idea that would have been completely alien, maybe even abhorrent, to the very first followers of Christ.
Now, this transformation wasn't just about big, abstract ideas like holy war. It went right into the heart of Christian practice, the liturgy. We're talking about the actual rituals of worship. So you have the formal Roman liturgy, and it travels north. But it doesn't just wipe out the local customs. Instead, it mixes with the Northern European rites, creating this new, hybrid Romano-Germanic liturgy. But here's the really wild part. This new, blended form of worship was so popular, so successful, that it eventually got exported back to Rome and became the standard for the entire Western Church. Think about that. The edges actually reshaped the center.
So, look, this is a really fascinating piece of history for sure, but why does it matter today? I mean, why should we care about these theological debates that happened more than 1,000 years ago?
Well, what this story really shows us is something powerful about how culture itself works. It tells us that there's really no such thing as a pure identity, not a religious one, not a national one, not a cultural one. It's all a product of exchange, of adaptation, of synthesis. This whole process created a very distinct brand of Western European Christianity, one that would go on to shape huge historical events like the Crusades and the growing split with the Eastern Church. The big takeaway is this: cultures don't just conquer each other. They flow into one another, and they create something totally new and unexpected in the process.
And all of that leaves us with one last really provocative question to think about. This story, from way back in early medieval Europe, it kind of forces us to look at any moment of cultural contact, whether it's in the past or happening right now, and ask ourselves, when two powerful belief systems collide, who is really converting whom? The answer, as we've seen, is almost always way more complicated than we think.